All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the OurCrowd virtual event, the Post-COVID Corporation, how pandemic-driven innovation will change literally everything. We're going to have a very quick, fast-paced webinar today with a lot of topics to be covered. I'm Lali David. I'm a partner at OurCrowd. I'm happy to be here leading the webinar. Just very few words about OurCrowd. OurCrowd is the most active venture investor in Israel. We have a very unique framework where we invest in deals and funds, and we invite the crowd to join us in our investments. The crowd is a diverse crowd. The crowd includes family offices, institutional investors, corporate investors, and private accredited investors. We invite everyone to join us in our investments. We always invest from our own fund into these investment opportunities. Altogether, we have more than 1.4 billion committed into the deals. We vetted more than 10,000 funding applications and made more than 220 direct investments in 22 different funds. This is a snapshot of our portfolio. It's a very diverse portfolio across many different sectors, stages, and geographies. You can see the distinction between different sectors, and you can see the different funds that we invested in. We either create our own funds, thematic-based funds, or we invest in third-party funds as an LP, and we basically secure this investment opportunity for the benefit of our investors. We have our own digital health fund, Cure, which is extremely active these days with everything related to pandemic. In mobility, we invested in Maniv. Outside of Israel, we invested in USVP, in Octo, in Proof. In Israel, in early stage, we invested in Ofek, in F2, and others. We have 4 government-backed incubators here in Israel that are thematic or geographic or both, and 1 outside of Israel in New Zealand. Labs02 in Jerusalem is our deep tech incubator. We're very proud of our incubator business. It gives us a lot of visibility into the early stage scene, and we're very successful with our investments that are early stage incubator, government-backed with the Ministry of Innovation. Altogether, we invest alongside leading global VCs and local VCs, alongside angels, alongside multinational corporations on the same terms, in the same deals. We basically enable our investors to invest in these deals alongside all these excellent investors. We have global strategic partners, financial institutions such as UOB in Singapore, NAB in Australia, Reliance in India, and very recently, strategic relationships with Stifel, which is mutually valuable and highly regarded by both sides. We develop different ways of collaborating with multinational companies with OurCrowd Innovate. OurCrowd Innovate is our corporate partnership program. We have partners in OurCrowd Innovate such as Honda, Keppel, Denso, Bancolombia. This is across geographies and across sectors. Very interestingly, these days is Changi Airport that we are partnering with on the technology innovation side. When we partner with corporations in OurCrowd Innovate, we identify where the corporate is alongside the innovation journey, because it is a journey. And we go through a needs assessment, and then we divide the services to the different innovation blocks, knowledge, engagement, and community. Heading this program, and we'll continue the webinar, is Dan Fischel, our VP of Business Development, to take us through the thought process of rethinking corporate innovation and what's extremely relevant these days. Dan.
Thank you, Lali. So by now, I assume that many of you have seen many webinars, and this is probably one of many. But in all these webinars, there's always this kind of self-certified experts in what sorts of expertise and et cetera, et cetera. And I have to start with a disclaimer. I am an expert of none. My job at OurCrowd is to connect corporations with Israeli innovation, and what I bring to the table is basically 20 years of entrepreneurship. Actually, this is my 3rd global crisis, and I've seen it happening again and again, same type of trades. And when we're talking with corporations, we see many different things that I'd like to speak with you today. Now, when I say that I'm not an expert, I'm definitely not an expert in psychology. But I assume that most of you would agree with me that while this pandemic is medical in nature, the implications or the impact on the economy is mostly psychological. Now, there is this very famous Kubler-Ross model that basically describes how humans react to radical change. And I can talk about myself. I started with a complete denial. I said, oh, this Chinese virus, as a certain president calls it, this Chinese virus will never make its way here to Israel. And guess what? And then I got super depressed. All the plans that we've made for the future, all gone overnight. Now I think I'm somewhere between depression to acceptance. Actually, I'm bargaining. Actually, this is the exact term that we're using when I'm sharing my experiences with you. And I'm going to tell you in a second why I'm telling you this, but we want to do something a bit different in this webinar. We're going to actually run some polls to keep you engaged. And Elisheva, maybe you can pose the first question. Let's see how everyone's feeling today, okay? So the polls are going to be on the screen for exactly 10 seconds, okay? Panelists cannot vote. Let's see how you feel today. Are you in denial? Are you depressed? Are you on the way to acceptance? Can we see the results now? Okay, it looks like everyone's already in acceptance and or on the way there. So definitely the way we assumed it to be. Now, besides this, there is another human phenomenon, psychological human phenomenon that is called the mere exposure effect. And that basically means that we as humans, we always tend to focus on what's familiar. Even executives in corporations are known to focus on familiar business practices versus other ones that are less familiar but more profitable for the business. And because humans run corporations, corporations tend to behave in the exact same way. They focus on what's familiar. They focus on the core business because it's safe, because it's predictable. And in many cases, executive would say, you know, it's a time of crisis. What do I need to invest in innovation, in startups? Does it bring me revenue? Let's focus on what we know. And it makes a lot of sense. But just focusing on what's safe and predictable has been proven to be bad for business, because the corporate graveyards are full of companies that had played it safe and predictable for way too long after the economy has changed. BlackBerry is probably the most famous case. They played it safe and predictable on a highly profitable business for way too long after the iPhone and the app stores were introduced. So even before COVID, we've seen that the lifespan of S&P 500 company is decreasing, and it's decreasing exponentially from 60 years to less than 20 today to just about 12 years by 2027. This is Credit Suisse data. Now the question is why this is happening. And it's happening because of two words: technology, disruption. Tech disruption, it basically means that you introduce a product to market that renders the previous product obsolete, like what the iPhone did to all previous phones. Now, tech disruption on its own is not new. It's been with us since the 19th century. You know, the cars have disrupted the horse. But what's new, what's different right now is it happens at a pace that is much faster than ever before. Tech adoption has never been faster. If you take a look at this chart, it shows that it took Americans about 50 years to adopt electricity in their homes. It took them less than 10 to adopt the smartphone. By the way, the only outlier here, and it's not on this chart, is TV adoption in the 50s and 60s, also took 10 years, but for different reasons. Tech adoption right now it's never been faster until COVID, because COVID completely changed even the fast pace of innovation that we've seen before, of tech adoption. It's actually over the roof. It's exponentially accelerated tech adoption in a pace never before seen in human history. And there's many indicators. Amazon hiring 100,000 new employees to meet demand. Ocado, I used to live in the UK. It's the biggest online supermarket. Up until a month ago, they would place you on a virtual queue of 2 hours. You would wait for 2 hours to get on a website to get your groceries done. Not to mention that Netflix doubled their subscribers last quarter. So you might arguably and say that fine, for every company that got lucky during COVID, there's plenty of others that didn't, like Uber or Airbnb, and it's true. However, there is one or three big differences. The first is that tech adoption now is reaching new demographics it did not reach before, like the elderly. It's changing consumer behaviors. I'd say it's changing human behaviors in a way that never happened before. And if you're a corporation, tech adoption now is changing by the virtue that there's a huge shift of corporations towards the cloud, because the current on-premise IT systems were not designed to support remote work. So here's a quick recap of what happened here over the last couple of months. In the UK, for the first time in 700 years, MPs can vote online. In New York, you can get married via Zoom. In Israel, you can file a complaint with the police online without the need to show up at the station. And Israeli police, I mean, their technology is, non-existent. We all work from home. And you know what? There's some surveys, and there's one, a quick poll for us to answer, and let's see how effective or productive you are working from home. But there is a survey of INSEAD, a vast majority, 41% productivity improved. More productive, even 55% among the attendees here. Great. So it's, work from home is so effective that the Morgan Stanley CEO says, we don't need that much real estate. And the CEO of Barclays says, crowded offices is a thing of the past. We don't need all this real estate. I didn't even touch telemedicine. It's up the roof. The idea that you can pick up your phone and chat with the doctor, or you can actually get diagnosed remotely, it's unheard of. And if we're looking at the perception of telemedicine during COVID-19, we see that the vast majority of Americans, over 50%, either tried or are willing to try. And those who tried, 97% of them will schedule another appointment. That was, this level of tech adoption was not possible just a couple years ago. Of course, everyone's talking about online grocery shopping that is up the roof. And the data doesn't lie, they more than tripled. The sales of online grocery shopping more than tripled. And we have the first-time buyers, 39% of them are elderly. To that extent that the Microsoft CEO is saying that they've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation happening just in the last couple of months. My personal opinion, it's way more than 2 years. How long do you think it would have taken the New York to allow online marriages? Definitely not 2, maybe 5. How long it would take to the Israeli police to approve filing complaints online? Maybe 10. And the reality is the tech adoption doesn't reverse. There's no going back. Never in the history of mankind, we adopted a technology and then ditched it. I'll tell you more than that. If we are to put qualitatively, like to draw a line on this chart, it would be simply like a straight 90 degrees line, the digitization of everything that hasn't been digital so far. Now let's move on. Let's talk about automation. And automation is basically the process by which machines are replacing humans. And we tend instinctively to think about this process as a straight line. Every year, there's a little bit more humans that are replaced by a little bit more machines. But the reality, it's wrong, because automation happens in bursts, and they're centered around economic crisis. So the previous 3 recessions were followed by spikes of automation. It happened in 2008, it happened in 2000, and it happened in 1991. And that is because the relative cost of labor goes up when corporate revenues go down. So now the question is, what happens to all these employees that are laid off back then and even now? So the vast majority of job loss was in low-income routine occupation that can be easily automated. And these employees that have lost their jobs in previous recessions, but also this one, are replaced with a mix of technology and highly skilled workers. And you can see the chart on the right. After or during the 2008 recession, we've seen a spike in the requirements for highly skilled workers in terms of their education, in terms of their experience, and in terms of their computer skills. Now let's talk about how your sector is affected, because there's plenty of research out there. Brookings is a research institute in DC, but McKinsey and PwC, they all have very, very similar data. The automation potential of the job force is double digit. Actually 46% across the entire US market. What Brookings Institute have done, they simply mapped 73 million jobs and they determined their automation potential. And guess what? Accommodation and food services, exactly the sector that has been impacted most during COVID, hotels and restaurants, the automation potential there is 73%. It's up the roof. Now, it doesn't mean that all of these sectors, that all of these jobs will be automated. It just means there is a potential for them to automate. And now let's look at what's different in this recession compared to the last three. The main difference is not just the insane number of employees, 20 million, that have lost their job in the US in the last couple of months. There's one big difference, and that's called AI. The ability, now we have the ability to learn. Algorithms can learn and they can replace humans in cognitive tasks, not just in manual labor. The impact on AI in this coming years, again, my guess is as good as anyone else's, but my guess is going to be huge. It's going to be huge. Moving forward, let's talk about the good times. So in good times, if you think about the last 10 years, definitely excellent 10 years, I think, for everyone. If you look at the top 10 publicly traded companies by market cap, in Q1 2010, only 2 were tech companies. If you look at the same list, last quarter, 7 of them are tech companies. We'll talk about why in a second, but let's talk about the bad times. Let's talk about now or post-COVID. There's 2 terms that I'd like us to touch. First is acceleration, and the second one is transformation. And acceleration basically means the increase in the adoption rate of existing technology for a given sector. For example, financial services would undergo an acceleration of digital technologies. They don't need other technologies, but technologies that are already on the shelf, they just need to be adopted. We're going to see an acceleration of that. On the flip side, there is transformation, which is basically the application of new technology or repurposing of technology from another sector into a given sector. For example, air travel, they were focused on security so far, plenty of technologies out there for security, but now they need to transform to look into biosecurity, a new technology that wasn't there before. And there's a way to look at this kind of on a graph, and there's a quick poll asking you how your sector is affected, but you can definitely see that on the x-axis, if what is the you can check, for example, what is the impact or the relative impact of COVID on your sectors versus the y-axis, which is the need of new tech versus the need of or acceleration of existing technologies. And I say that the vast majority of you believe that you would need a mix of new and existing technologies. Healthcare sector is one example where you would need new tech and an acceleration of existing technologies. Now let's talk about what's the solution, okay? The solution for growth is innovation. And there's 2 types of innovation. There's the incremental type of innovation. Basically, you have a 3 razor blade and now you're manufacturing a 5 razor blade. So it's this incremental innovation. And there is the disruptive innovation, basically what Netflix did to the DVD, what Spotify did to the CD. Now, if you're manufacturing DVDs, would you invest in streaming technologies to cannibalize your business? Probably not. But this is exactly what you need to do in order to face the next reality, the next normal. The question is, who is the competitors now? And I assume that if you're working in a corporation, you might think that your competitors are the other big corporation. If you're in Barclays, you'd say You know, my competitors is Lloyd's. If you're JP Morgan, it's going to be Morgan Stanley. But if you're looking at disruptive innovation, the real competitors are very, very hard to see because there's so many, and they are called startups. And they focus just on one thing, and that one thing they do really, really well. And as a group, they go after every single line of business of a corporation. So if you're a bank, going back to the previous example, they go after mortgages and loans and credits. If you're an insurance company, they replace agents with bots. And the reality is, and there's a quick question for you, only if you have iPhones, are you using Apple Maps? Let's answer this quickly. If you have an iPhone, are you using Apple Maps? Yes or no? Let's see the results. No. Okay, so 73%. No, and you know why nobody's using, or 73 plus 11 is a vast majority. Why nobody uses Apple Maps? By the way, those who use Apple Maps are probably from China. In China, it's big, but anywhere else, it's not. Because in 2012, when Apple launched Apple Maps, it was a disaster. When you were looking for London on the app, it would show you London, Ontario in Canada. When you were looking for the Tokyo railway station, it was simply not there. What Tim Cook did was simply writing an apology message to all the iPhone users saying, you know what, we screwed up, but there's another company that's called Waze. Why don't you go and download their app? Waze back then was like an anonymous startup in Israel, and they got huge literally overnight. This is a classic example of a tiny startup can overthrow a market leader, a technology market leader, one of the big techs, and they can do it as well overnight. So when we're talking about what corporations should do at time of uncertainty, and when we say that they're focusing on what's safe and predictable, they're focusing on their core business, I'd like to suggest that they also partner or invest in startups. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's not safe, and it's not predictable, and it's not working well. It's early stage technology, but this is exactly what corporations need to do in order to stay ahead of the game, because all the innovation or most of the innovation in the last 30 years has been coming from startups. I reflect on the previous slide I showed, the top 10 publicly traded companies by market cap. If you look at the top 7, they're only 28 years old, less than 30. If you look at the rest, they're way older. And Berkshire Hathaway, by the way, just sold all their holdings, Warren Buffett, all his holdings in airlines, taking a huge hit. On the other hand, the big techs are kind of immune to COVID. Not just because of their Q1 earnings, but because they're indicating very strong growth also after COVID. Now, the question is, how come? How is it possible? And the answer is that the only vaccine to coronavirus is technology. Let's take a look at what type of technology you need, not to fight the pandemic, but to keep the economy going, to keep our jobs. What do you need? You need like a reliable and cheap software to be able to work from home. You need a reliable and cheap software for your children to be able to continue going to school from home. You need a proper internet speed. You need a wireless network. You need e-commerce, the availability of goods to be shipped to your home. Now, can you imagine how the world would look if COVID were to strike in 2008? I'll give you a better scenario. What if COVID would have struck in 1991? There was not even internet back then. Can you imagine how the world would look? We probably would be forced into 2 scenarios. A, staying at home and basically letting the economy collapse completely. We would all starve. Or probably the most reasonable option, continue to go to work and pay a huge toll in human lives. So technology is the only vaccine to COVID. And now is the time to invest in technology. Now is the time to partner with startups, because how strong you emerge tomorrow really matters on what you're doing today. We're going to hear from our analysts today how certain sectors are going to be impacted by COVID. I wish you great success. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to Patricia Brand, our program manager of OurCrowd Innovate, to talk about some innovation case studies.
Thank you, Dan. So we have interviewed corporations from different sectors within our network to really understand where they were focusing their innovation efforts and how COVID-19 impacted their business and innovation strategies. The major US bank we spoke to had rolled out a digital solution for its customers about 18 months ago. So they said that they were ready to deal with the consequences of the virus when it came, including the isolation measures. In the beginning of the crisis, the biggest issue for this bank was to set up their employees for remote working, considering both compliance and cybersecurity issues, and adapting the call centers to function with smaller people working at the same time. The challenges going forward involved dealing with the reality that people will be late with their payments for credits and loans, and risk assessment in terms of finding different ways to evaluate risk within the new scenario. Their areas of interest include cybersecurity, know your customer, and risk assessment. We have also interviewed a global credit card company, which has been highly impacted by the crisis. For credit card companies around the world, business changed overnight as their most lucrative business, which was corporate spending, vanished with the spread of the virus. Think about it. People no longer travel for business or conferences and pay for the expenses on their corporate credit cards. So now the company is focusing on online shopping, specifically for groceries. And this ties back to what Dan was showing us about new demographics and the changing of consumer behavior. The main challenge continues to be supporting SMEs. So they're focusing on tools to help small businesses and the gig economy. They're interested in digitalization and online presence tools, data analytics, and social welfare related solutions. Now, we all know the role that airports played in the spread of the disease, with millions of people traveling around the world and carrying the virus with them. As Dan mentioned before, the air travel industry will be transformed. This specific airport's long-term focus is automation and to become infectious disease proof. They want to be ready for the next pandemic. The airport aims to create a bio border, enabling a safe environment for travelers and also the airport staff. The major challenge is to understand what the new normal in this industry is going to look like and how to lead this kind of transition. With that in mind, the airport has several areas of interest, and most of them will be addressed during the aviation session of the webinar. And last, we spoke to a huge food and beverage company. I'm sure all of you have bought their products and enjoy them very, very much. The company is completely rethinking its innovation efforts. Before COVID-19, it was focused on small solutions and incremental innovation, and now innovation is focused on redefining how the company does business and allocates budget and resources, considering all of the changes brought by the virus. Like the other companies that I mentioned, this company wants to make the business safer, and that means providing a healthy environment in workspaces, encouraging hand washing and social distancing. But more than that, the company wants to understand how to navigate the new waters. Before COVID, for example, it was hard to imagine a football game without snacks and sodas. Now, with no more sports events, leisure dining in restaurants or bars, the company was forced to rethink its marketing strategy. From advertisements during games targeted at the masses to personalized in-store advertisements, for example. And more than ever, the company is looking at artificial intelligence to learn from its supply chain and identify spikes in demand and track the changes in consumer behavior. So the company's areas of interest include shifting marketing online, personalization, and interactive experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. We're going to move into the different sectors, and the first one is actually aviation. Thank you, Yakir, for joining us. Yakir will share with us how air travel is going to look after COVID. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lali. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dan and Patricia, for speaking about aviation a bit in your parts. So I think that in order to really understand the role that the aviation industry had in this pandemic outbreak, we need to just quickly reflect over some pandemic history, going as back as the 14th century to the Black Death that wiped out over a fifth of the world population at the time. It took 10 years to spread from Asia globally. Moving on to a century ago, the Spanish flu, mainly relying on soldiers that were sent to fight in World War I, it took less than 2 years to spread globally, which brings us to COVID-19. COVID-19 took a mere 4 months to spread from China globally and arriving almost to every point of the globe. And this is mainly attributed to the globalization effect that swept the world in pre-corona days. And so it's no surprise really that the aviation industry has been affected so much by the outbreak, because you can't talk about globalization without mentioning the aviation industry and the key role that it has in driving global trade, in supporting e-commerce, leisure travel, you name it, open skies, you name it, it's the aviation industry is the core of it. And so we've seen actually in the mid of April this year, we've seen a decline of almost 61% in flight volume, which is very significant, especially if we bear in mind that this is a year where we expected a growth, not staying in the same line, and we've seen 60% decline. And the aviation industry is not a stranger to times of crisis. Even if we're looking at short-term history, we're looking at the 9/11 events, SARS outbreak, the 2008 financial crisis. All of these had vast implications on the aviation industry that required some kind of adaptation from the aviation industry. But we believe that this time the adaptation is a bit different, or much more different, where we don't need to introduce improvements to an existing layer of the aviation industry, but actually introduce a complete new layer of measures to the industry. And this is what we describe as the transition from security to biosecurity. Now, biosecurity refers to a set of preventive measures designed to reduce the risk of transmission of infectious diseases in humans, animals, and crops. Now, if this term is already familiar to you, you're probably familiar with my right side of the screen, where you have to fill out forms. You see these signs spread out across the airport. You see sniffing dogs looking for some kind of forbidden substances. But the common denominator of these measures were that they mainly focused on agriculture, animals, processed foods, and medicine. And the measures that were used in order to enforce these biosecurity 1.0 aspects were mainly X-ray, sniffing dogs, and governmental biosecurity reps that were deployed in the airports. What we've seen so far, what we expect to see is, like Dan mentioned, a transition into AI. And this is not something that we came up with. This is something that already is evident from the leading regulators like the FAA, like the IATA, and the World Health Organization. So we're looking at a focus that is going to shift from agriculture and animals towards the human aspect and the human factor of biosecurity. And in that entails immunity passports, symptom screening, temperature screening, disinfection of your baggage and yourself, which brings us to semi-tagging. Semi-tagging is actually tagging your baggage, but after it was marked as sanitized, to make sure that it's safe throughout the journey. And of course, enforcing social distancing. And the measures are completely different. AI has a key role now. AI, computer vision, contactless sensing, autonomous robots, multi-layered bioscreening, all of these has a really key role. And really, this is just to end my part, because I don't have a lot of time. I want to share with you how we believe the future of the passenger journey is going to look like in post-COVID world. So it's actually starting with pre-screening as early as even before we left our cars. We're going to get thermal checked by companies that actually provide thermal checking in driving vehicles. You won't even have to stop in order to get checked. And then as you walk into the airport, you will be disinfected using UV lights that are actually safe for human beings, but are lethal for infectious diseases and viruses from companies like Juganu. Multi-sensory screening would not only focus on thermal checks, but would actually provide a multi-layered approach where you will be checked for symptoms, for respiratory rate, heart rate variability, your voice would be checked for any kind of indications. And all of these would basically create a kind of a safety net that would allow the initial screening. After that, if you so happen to fail these tests, you need to go through screening confirmation with point-of-care medical-grade solutions that will check your either your blood or saliva for an existing virus. Then later on, you would have in the security part, you would have to be we would have to have automation in order to facilitate the enforcement of social distancing and prevent queuing. Later on in the lounge area, radar solutions and AI solutions would be also in place, would be instated in order to make sure that you keep your personal hygiene and of course still enforce social distancing even in not so regular areas like maybe the restrooms. Boarding is probably the biggest problem in terms of queuing. All of us love to run at the gate and get the first entrance maybe to the airplanes. At least I do. I don't know. Maybe it's the Israeli way. But companies like Neura would actually allow us to get a notification, a push notification to our cell phones right on the exact time to get to the boarding gate, preventing again any kind of queuing. And of course, on board the plane, we would meet we expect to meet maybe robots that would replace the flight attendants. Then again, at the destination airport, would again be disinfected and be screened again. And in border control, since we'll all be wearing masks, we would actually use AI to differentiate the people and use that for verifying the identity, even with a mask on our face. And at the destination that we got there, we would have applications that would help us connect to the doctors, even while we're traveling and having fun, just to make sure that we're keeping healthy, even where we're having fun. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Yakir. We're gonna go through different sectors, and the next one is actually FinTech, and we're gonna move to Josh Liggett, who leads FinTech sector here at OurCrowd, to speak about financial services after COVID. Josh.
Thanks so much, Lali. Really happy to be here. So what we put together was a quick, was a little report that we put together. Was really awesome, which a lot of the work that was done with Dan and that Dan spoke about and what Patricia spoke about regarding what's the tech trends in financial services. You know, in that, what we basically found is that banks are really far behind, and just like what Dan was saying with acceleration, that banks and financial service companies are accelerating their adoption of digital transformation. And what we saw, we can really embody that in one sentence, is the fact that New Jersey, you know, a month or so ago had a shortage of masks, respirators, and COBOL developers, sorry, the Freudian slip. Which is a 60-year-old programming language, and you know, in order to try to get payments out to people. And the problem is that banks are built on really, really, really old technology, and it has a huge impact everywhere. And according to a recent poll, it found that 55%, which if you look at this chart, the right side being mainstream players and laggards, are banks that are really far behind in terms of adoption and transformation, that they're not fully transformed. Only 12% found themselves being leaders, and 34% found themselves being followers. So what we're going to see now is a tremendous acceleration of digitization, both internally and externally from banks. So that means upgrading legacy systems, which we're speaking about, remote work, which was, there was a big issue that came up regarding cybersecurity for people working away from the office, which is something that was new for banks and they had to deal with very quickly. Efficiency tools like AI and RPA, which is robotic processing automation, a very big topic, a webinar upon itself, and something really, really interesting. Digital identity to make sure somebody is who they are, and internal communications, whether it's Slack or something more interesting that uses AI, that uses something, you know, any sort of natural language processing. Externally, pretty simple, because people aren't necessarily coming to a branch anymore. They now need to be onboarded digitally, and they need digital applications of loans. And they need NLP, natural language processing, and AI-powered chatbots in order for them to communicate with their bank. So the question is, what are we going to see going forward? What are we going to see before and after COVID? So really, for traditional banks, trust is an advantage, and people are going to trust the banks that they have because they've been banking with them forever and they're well established. Yet at the same time, on the long term, there could be issues because fintech companies are becoming up, service providers coming out there that could theoretically take market share in the long run. So they're going to have to be on the lookout and make sure that they're not far behind. Fintech startups on the other end are a lot of companies that are looking to partner with banks. So many fintech startups would love to partner with banks, but they weren't able to because of the fact that banks are just moving so incredibly slow. And the polls coming up right now, finally getting into the big techs. The big tech companies, which are the Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google. And this is something really interesting because over the past few years, all those companies have started getting into financial services. And we believe that they're going to really accelerate that trend. Amazon, more on the vendor side, providing e-commerce. So everyone says, who in financial services is the highest growth? So not many people think banks will grow, which makes a lot of sense. Big tech companies and fintech. So really, really interesting stats from our audience on that. But going back to what actually has been going on is Amazon is being more of a service provider to banks, doing all the e-commerce that we know and trying to eat the world. Apple working with banks a little bit as well with their credit card, which was in conjunction with Goldman Sachs and their payments with Apple Pay. Facebook just recently, announced getting into payments, getting into their shops to compete with Amazon, and have done, gotten into payments as well. And finally, Google has reportedly spoken about and been in talks to open their own bank, to have debit cards, checking accounts, the whole 9 yards. So what's going to be interesting is how those three players interact with each other. Would somebody move from a traditional bank to a challenger bank? Would they move from, a traditional bank to a big tech? That whole area is really what we're going to see after COVID. But what we do know 100% for sure is that banks are going to have to adopt digital tools, or else they're going to be a lot of trouble. Thanks so much. Ask questions in the Q&A, or would love to, reach out directly to hear more about this.
Thank you very much, Josh. It's a good reminder for everyone. Please use the Q&A. The webinar is as good as it is interactive. So please use the Q&A, and we'll devote time for that at the end. Thank you so much, Josh. And we're going to move next to Kfir. Kfir is a principal at OurCrowd, the investment team. He's also a personal expert in fashion, our internal fashionista. Kfir, please share with us how retail is going to change after COVID. Thank you.
Yes, Lali, thank you. And thank you everybody here on the webinar tonight. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to be speaking about retail and this very exciting market. So we all now are in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And as we can see, my screen does not move. And as we can see from the United States, retail traffic, which means store traffic coming from the streets to the stores, has almost vanished in the months of COVID-19, having a big sword flying over the retailers. We saw JCPenney filing for bankruptcy. However, we have seen some retailers like Walmart having great success because they were smart enough to move online. And so the world of retail is changing. The world of retail have been changing for quite a while now. We saw more and more e-commerce and more players shifting to online experiences. And as we can see, another cool figure is that air traffic has almost stopped. Supply chain has been severely hurt in this COVID-19 crisis, meaning that the retail, where either shoppers flying on everywhere and going to do their shoppings, or merchandise within the bellies of the airplanes are not anymore moving around, which means the decreases of retail, decreases of shopping, meaning that disruption and innovation have to come into the retail space. Luckily for us here in Israel, when it comes to retail tech, we are huge. There's so many retail tech innovators in the Israeli landscape. And I want to focus about two segments of retail and walk you through the experience, right? So at the age of COVID-19, in-store has a whole different meaning than it used before. When you went on Zara and you wanted to try a piece, you just took it to the changing room and you tried it on. But now in the age of COVID-19, who wants to try something that somebody else has touched before? So we will have to see innovation within the store. It can be trying on products or trying on technologies. Like if you go to Sephora, they have that smart mirror where they show you how makeup looks, or you can have smart mirrors that show you, scan your body and show you how the dress or the t-shirt would look on you. Automated checkout. Today, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Israel, every cashier has this barrier in front of them to minimize the interaction between the shoppers and the cashiers. So the world of having a cashier where we have to go through and give the credit card or give our cash is about to disappear. And we see a lot of innovation in the automated checkout. We all know the Amazon Go grocery shops, but here in Israel, there's a lot of innovation, either smart carts or either a streamlined checkout queues. We will see that inside the stores, it will be more around the experience of coming into a store rather than shopping. But when it does happen, you still have to manage the traffic. You still have to manage the shelf. It's you're not going to have the same flowing around of products as you had before. You might have a few products just out there so people can look and experience with them, but the real products you take home with you will be then shopped online. And we see companies like Casper and we see companies like Dyson who have physical locations that are all about the experiences. Another part of innovation here is the e-commerce. So during this age of COVID-19, we have seen a lot of small and medium businesses having to shut their doors for 2 months, 3 months, taking a huge blow. That is something very, very important. It is how those stores that cannot rely on foot traffic anymore will move to the e-commerce innovation and having presence on the e-commerce. So you will have technologies of small and medium businesses and helping them to get onto the online platforms. You will have safer payments and fraud detection startups like BioCatch, which is an OurCrowd portfolio company. You will have startups or technologies that will help you either hunt that piece of garment that you think you saw on Instagram and show you where to shop it online, or you will have technology where you will see the clothes on you just after you took a picture with your phone. All of those are innovation, and all of those have and will change the way that we experience retail in the age of post-COVID-19. So thank you, everybody, and let's move forward.
Thank you very much, Phil. I think the common denominator across all the different sectors that are being revolutionized is supply chain. And I'm very happy to have with us Eitan from Freightos. Freightos is one of our portfolio companies, a company that we've supported for a while, and I'm extremely proud of the growth and success of Freightos. So I'm delighted to have Eitan to speak about supply chain. Thank you, Eitan.
Hey, thanks so much, Lally, and thank you so much to everybody who's preceded me so far. This is really fascinating, and I've just really enjoyed listening to everything that's happening. I'm going to focus on my 9 yards, which is international logistics. So what we're going to talk about over the course, sorry about that. What we're going to talk about is basically supply chain, how it's been impacted by COVID, and what we see going forward. A quick reminder, if you don't know, Freightos' mission is to make global trade frictionless. We've created the world's largest digital freight backbone. What that means in practice is that we connect, we connect companies across the board. So we operate Freightos.com, which is the world's largest international freight marketplace that connects some of the world's biggest logistics providers to small and mid-sized importers. We also run webcargo.co, which is a platform that connects airlines with freight forwarders. Now, I say this not just because I really like talking about Freightos and like talking about logistics. I say it because over the past couple of months, we have been living COVID. We have been experiencing it very, very intensely. One big takeaway though, and I think that after this presentation, if you walk away with one thing, it's that you should go out and hug a truck driver. International logistics has kept the world moving, right? Think about the masks that you're wearing every time you go outside. Those masks are a byproduct of supply chains that are actually operating. At the end of the day, the ability to keep things moving is what freight is all about. And as difficult as COVID has been so far, we haven't run out of food, right? We haven't run out of the basic supplies or clothing. Amazon slowed shipping down a little bit. Maybe we ran a little bit out of toilet paper, but as a whole, things have been very, very successful. That's not to say that there haven't been hiccups, and we've seen a lot of charts of things diving down. I'm going to show you a chart that's going up right over here. What you see here is ocean freight rates from China to the US West Coast since the beginning of COVID, as well as the air freight rates. Now, the ocean freight rates are a little bit complicated. The reason it stayed so flat is really for 2 or 3 different reasons, right? Ocean freight rates are an indicator of supply and demand. In February and March, Chinese factories practically shut down, both because of the Chinese New Year and then because of COVID. Now, once they shut down and once the trucks couldn't move to the actual ports, the ability to ship goods out of China totally dropped off. Now, in March and April, things started to pick up, but in the US, demand had already started to recede because large companies were afraid of a recession. At the same time, air freight prices have shot through the roof, right? We rarely appreciate that when we go onto a passenger plane, the entire underbelly of the plane is full of cargo. Half of imports into the United States take place on passenger airlines. That means that the supply of available space on airlines has dropped dramatically. And while people still need to import goods, like our masks again, the prices have shot up. Another major ramification that COVID has had is last mile delivery. I know that I've gone pretty crazy with the e-commerce shopping while I've been stuck at home. People in the United States have been doing that as well. Amazon in March had to deprioritize some types of shipments in order to make sure that they could deliver essential goods to people's homes. So there was a hit here on the e-commerce side that ended up hitting people a little bit hard. But let's look going forward. What's going to be happening over the next couple of years? And I'm fairly confident that there will be some large, very, very sweeping ramifications in the supply chain space. Now, again, just to remind you, supply chain can sound a little bit boring, but this is one of the biggest areas of investment as a whole. If you look at Amazon, they're basically a logistics company. They have warehouses that spread across the equivalent of 25% of Manhattan. It's a really big deal. I think the first trend that we're going to see is autonomous trucking. If you really needed a wake-up call for why it's so important, just look at the trucks within China. As I said earlier, even once manufacturing started to take off, a lot of shipments couldn't make it to the port because there was because people were scared that the truck drivers would spread COVID between provinces. Truckers do not have that problem. Autonomous trucks do not have that problem, which is a really good driver to build supply chain resilience and robustness. Being able to decouple the human factor and just use autonomous trucks is huge. A second and very, very interesting change has been rapidly moving SMBs. I used to talk about fidget spinners, you know, those stupid little toys that people use, as an example of how small stores were able to manufacture and import them, while companies like Toys R Us were still struggling to get them on the shelf. If you know Adams, they manufacture these very chic shoes. They switched over a couple of weeks ago to also manufacturing masks. That agility to quickly source something, import it, and sell it, using a combination of something like Alibaba, Freightos, or a different digital freight company, and then Amazon or Shopify is huge. And we've seen this happen again and again and again. As a matter of fact, most of the SMBs that import with Freightos have been busier than they normally are. We've seen a 14% growth year on year in small business activity. And last week we hit a record number of sellers that are selling on Amazon and importing using Freightos. Moving very fast, supply chain agility is going to continue to shape not just supply chain, but also retail capabilities. A third and very important trend, and this was alluded to in at least 3 or 4 previous presentations, is the airline space. Right? As we said, airlines were canceled at a huge rate. Airline flights were canceled at a very, very dramatic rate. Now, the chart that you're looking at is what's called load factor, which is just a fancy way of saying how full are the planes. The blue line shows, and the left axis, it's a very confusing chart, sorry, but the left axis shows that passenger planes are usually about 80% full, whereas airlines and the cargo on the airlines is only about 50% full, which is a shocking number. Half of the air cargo space on airplanes is not utilized. There's a reason it's not utilized. It's because it's not digitized. When you want to book a shipment on an airline, you have to call up your logistics provider, and then your logistics provider calls up the airline, and that's not going to fly. We've seen a big shift from airlines to try to move more cargo. In some cases, this is a picture from Lufthansa where they're flying cargo on the passenger seats, but the ability to quickly manage air cargo in real time in order to see, Is there available space on a specific plane? How much does it cost to get it on that plane and let me ship it tomorrow is going to impact not just the airline bottom line, but also B2B e-commerce, the ability to move really, really quickly and ship goods around the world. Finally, more ways to your doorstep. If you know, you might not know this, but Amazon within the United States, about 50% of their sales are from third-party sellers. And those third-party sellers, for the most part, rely on Amazon for delivery. What those sellers discovered during COVID is that they can't necessarily rely on Amazon as a bulletproof solution for delivery. If they were selling through Amazon and only used Amazon for delivery, their business over the past 2 or 3 months has really dwindled down if they weren't selling essential goods. So what I think we're going to see out of this is a resurgence in companies that support SMBs to do last mile delivery, whether it's Shopify, internal solutions like Bring, or omni-channel like Walmart. That's it from my side. If you have any questions, of course, please feel free to drop in the chat. And thanks again to the OurCrowd team for putting together such a fantastic webinar.
Thank you very much, Eitan. This was great. We're going to move quickly to speak with David Sokolik to discuss some of the post-pandemic investment themes that we're seeing, very interesting themes that we're now putting our investment efforts on. David, to you.
Yeah, so we've been doing some work to kind of map out some crisp themes around COVID and the response to it. Sadly, this pandemic has had an impact on society, but we think that startups have an important role to play to be able to address some of these needs. So I'm going to try to give you just a very high level flavor of what it is we're actually looking at and where we're hunting. So we've divided it up into 3 different pillars. The first one is prevention and containment, and that has to do with how can we address the actual essential health needs that have emerged out of the pandemic. So an example of that is the investment that we're currently funding in a company called MigVax that's developing a vaccine for COVID. We're also looking at opportunities both in innovative types of PPE and testing that can enable us to better understand how the virus is progressing. The second major pillar is treatment and healing. So here we're looking at things like therapeutics and diagnostics. We also see, as previous speakers mentioned, this experience accelerating a few key trends. So medical robotics is something that OurCrowd's been looking at for a while, but we think because of the need to socially distance, that we could see that get accelerated. And there's also been a lot of innovation here in Israel around telehealth and hospitalizing people at home. And we think all of that will get accelerated as well post-COVID, both because it saves costs and also provides arguably a better environment for patients that don't necessarily need all of the services available in a hospital, but still need to be monitored. And then the last bucket is continuity and disruption mitigation. So this is a broad bucket of things we call the new normal. Many of these were touched upon by the earlier speakers, but I'll highlight a few. So, you know, obviously, as you guys said, we're more productive working at home, and we now have the basic tools like Zoom or Microsoft Teams to be able to handle video and audio and web conferencing. But we think there's all kinds of secondary impacts in terms of how do corporations become more agile in this environment, and what does it even mean in the way a corporation is organized. We think there's going to be a lot of accelerated investment in robotics, whether it's robotic process automation that automates a lot of what a knowledge worker does. We also think on the manufacturing side, there's going to be an acceleration of robotics because we saw that reliance on human workers just put a lot of companies out of business or drastically cut back their operations. There's a lot of discussion here about supply chain and logistics, but we fully agree there's a lot of opportunity there as well, and there's a few different investments we're looking at in that space. So we have actually mapped out some pretty detailed investment themes around all these areas, but just wanted to give you a flavor of what it is we're looking at.
Thank you very much, David. We're about to end the webinar. I wanted to highlight that we are inviting everyone to join us for the OurCrowd Pandemic Innovation Conference taking place on June 22nd. As much as it sounds strange, space is limited. Even on Zoom, space is limited, and we have great experience with high numbers of people joining our events. So we're going to have the link to sign up already at the chat box. Please check it out and use the link to sign up for the conference. We're going to go into a quick Q&A. The main question that we had was, are we sharing the deck? We are sharing the deck. Simply email Dan, and it's a good opportunity to invite Dan to join us back. Simply email Dan. He posted his email at the chat box. Dan, last words to wrap it up.
Right, so actually this is the first webinar. The only questions on the Q&A are I won the deck. So we take that as a big compliment. So basically what you've got today is a taster of OurCrowd Innovate. And OurCrowd Innovate is our corporate partnership that helps connect corporations with Israeli innovation. We already work with many corporates around the world, Toyota, Honda, Changi Airport, Bancolombia, just to name a few. And what we do with them is basically take the resources, the knowledge, and most importantly, the network of OurCrowd, and we make it available for corporations as a resource. OurCrowd Innovate is divided into three main innovation blocks: knowledge, engagement, and community. On the knowledge, we do webinars that can be customized to a certain corporations. We write reports that again are customized to certain corporations on tech trends that we're seeing. We dive deep with the corporations to understand their pain points so we can suggest relevant companies, relevant technologies. And on the engagement side, we do technology scouting, connect corporations with startups that solve their biggest need. And again, I cannot stress how important it is to partner with startups. If you hear corporations, you will not be able to get this disruptive technology, all these new ideas into your corporations unless you take them from outside. So we help also in the proof of concept process, the POC, the initial design of the partnership between a corporate and a startup. We offer two investment vehicles for corporations, ones that invest in the OurCrowd portfolio, and the other one, it's basically an external CVC. It's a fund that can invest in any company. On the community blocks, and this is one of the community activities that we do, we connect corporations with one another and together with the Israeli innovation ecosystem. So please join us at innovate.ourcrowd.com. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. Please answer that very quick question so we can improve based on your feedback. Thanks a lot.